Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the opening plenary session for the 2022 Texas Conference on Digital Libraries. My name is Christy Park. I'm the Executive Director of the Texas Digital Library. And I am thrilled to be back at TCDL with all of you in this second year of virtual conferencing. And I'm so excited, as I know all of you are, about what we're going to learn together this week and what we're going to experience over the next few days. I'm going to be facilitating today's opening session, which will begin in earnest momentarily with the land acknowledgement and official welcome from TDL's board chair. Following that, we're going to honor and celebrate this year's recipients of the Texas Digital Library Awards. And then we're going to welcome our keynote speaker, Elaine L. Westbrooks, for her talk, followed by time for some questions. So we've got a lot to do today. With that overview in mind, it is my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Elaine L, who is the Vice Provost and Director of the UT Libraries at the University of Texas at Austin. Elaine is currently serving as chair of the TDL Governing Board, and I'm going to turn it over to her now for a land acknowledgement and a few opening remarks. Over to you, Elaine.
Thank you, Christy. Good morning. And I want to make sure that you can all hear me. I saw some comments in the chat. Can you give me a thumbs up? Good. Thank you, Leah. Good morning and welcome, everybody. I'm Elaine L, and I'm delighted this morning to welcome you to the 2022 TCDL. I'd like to start us off with a land acknowledgement that we are meeting on the indigenous lands of Turtle Island, the ancestral name for what is now called North America. I would like to acknowledge the Alabama Coushatta, the Caddo, Carrizo, Comecrudo, Coahuiltecan, Comanche, Kickapoo, Lipan, Apache, Tonkawa, and Isleta del Sur Pueblo, and all the American Indian and indigenous peoples and communities who have been or have been a part of these lands and territories here in Texas. I hope each of you will take a moment to acknowledge and recognize the indigenous peoples where you reside. The Texas Digital Library is a collaborative consortium based here in Texas. It is rooted in higher education that builds capacity among our membership to ensure equitable access to and preservation of digital content of value to research, instruction, cultural heritage, and institutional memory. Our success is bound to that of 29 member institutions and all their workers. Through our collective efforts, we strive to prepare and empower diverse and inclusive library workforce to meet the challenges of the moment by amplifying their unique contributions, enabling sustainable workloads, and fostering mutually supportive communities. For those of you who are anchored in this community, thank you. We are grateful for your contributions to our collaborative endeavors. For those of you who are new to the TDL community, welcome. We look forward to getting to know each other, to learn from one another and explore paths to our mutual personal and professional growth. The Texas Digital Library has been organizing and hosting the Texas Conference on Digital Libraries since 2007. And over time, we have seen many TDL members organize and collaborate on this annual conference. We are striving to find ways for our planning committee and membership as a whole to reflect the diverse ethnicities, career paths, and talents that make up our community. Our goal is to bring together those working on digital projects, including those who work with open education, outreach, scholarly communications and research support, archives, students, faculty members, technical staff, and many others in order to build a practical, usable, and sustainable model for digital libraries within the state of Texas and beyond. We are so excited to welcome all our presenters this year who are sharing their work with us on digital preservation, collections and metadata, research support, and so much more. And I am particularly honored and thrilled this morning to host this year's keynote, Elaine L. Westbrooks of University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill for just a few days more. Elaine will inspire us to better understand and embody the value of being of and for equity and inclusion in libraries and archives. And I'm very proud to note that Ms. Westbrooks is TCDL's first woman of color to stand as conference keynote. Thank you and welcome, Elaine. Digital juggling is our conference theme this year, and we at TDL feel this theme captures our community's awe-inspiring abilities to adapt, adopt, support each other, and thrive under the big tent. We also recognize that over the past 2 years especially, we have all earned the right to feel exhausted and annoyed, or thrilled and adventurous about all of the pins from work, from home, and life that we are asked to juggle each day. For many of us in different contexts, juggling is fun and entertaining. For some of us in other contexts, juggling is difficult work and exhausting. And so, regardless of your juggling prowess, from all of us at TDL to all of you here today, we see you and we see your work. We are so appreciative of all you do, and especially that you are here with us for TCDL this week. Thank you for joining us. And now, on with the show. Christy.
Thank you so much, Lorraine, for that warm welcome and for your inspiring leadership for TDL over the last year as chair, and really for many years as a wonderful partner for TDL. So Texas Digital Library and the TCDL Planning Committee are dedicated to providing an experience for everyone that is free from all forms of harassment and inclusive of all people. We ask that everybody here today and throughout this week will be considerate and respectful in your speech and action, and attempt collaboration before conflict, that you refrain from demeaning, discriminatory, or harassing behavior and speech, and that you're mindful of your environment and your fellow participants at TCDL this week. You can view our full code of conduct on the homepage of the conference website, and we're going to provide a link to that in chat. And if you experience or witness something that violates that code of conduct, we really want you to tell us about that. And you can get help by directly messaging either me or our Deputy Director, Courtney Muma. We're going to paste links or information about our contact information in chat for you now. Okay. So now we will move on to one of our very favorite parts of TCDL, where we celebrate this year's recipients of the Texas Digital Library Awards. We at TDL are continually, constantly inspired and driven by the amazing work going on within our member libraries and other organizations throughout Texas and the region. Work that furthers TDL's mission of ensuring long-term equitable access to digital content of value to research, instruction, cultural heritage, and institutional memory. We're honored to play a part in facilitating some of that work, and the TDL Awards are an opportunity for us to recognize the labor and the creativity and expertise of the library and archives workers in our communities. Every year through the TDL Awards, we honor individuals and groups that have made outstanding contributions to the advancement of digital libraries in various areas, including outreach, scholarly communication, individual impact, service to the TDL consortium, and overall excellence. We also honor a student who is already making a huge impact in the field, and a trailblazer who is using limited resources in innovative and imaginative ways to support digital collections. So I am now delighted to hand things over to Cynthia Henry, the Research Instruction and Outreach Librarian at Texas Tech University Libraries and the chair of this year's TDL Awards Committee. She's going to announce our first awards recipients. Over to you, Cynthia.
Thank you, Christy. I'm excited to be presenting the TDL Awards for 2022, along with Courtney Muma of Texas Digital Libraries. Our first award is the Individual Impact Award, which celebrates an individual who has made significant contributions and improvements to the field, demonstrating through leadership in digital initiatives or the development of students and early career professionals. This year's Individual Impact Award winner is Michael Shinsky, our GIS coordinator of the University of Texas at Austin. Michael was nominated by members of the TDL's GIS interest group for all his work with building this group over the last 2 years. Building from a birds of a feather presentation on geographic information systems, GIS, in 2020, Michael saw a need where a new community could grow. Gathering the many attendees from the GIS meeting, he organized a statewide interest group, building subcommittees and developing the structure of the group. Under his leadership, Michael was particularly thoughtful in creating a welcome environment for everyone to feel like they had a place to be involved, regardless of expertise or affiliation. He created opportunities for anyone with interest to get involved and contribute to the group's work. Thank you for building and sustaining TDL's GIS interest group, and congratulations on your award, Michael. Our next award will be the Outreach Award, which celebrates an individual or team who demonstrates a creative and successful approach to increasing the ability of digital information, promoting engagement among new users, and increasing public awareness of organizations' digital collections. The 2022 TDL Outreach Award goes to Stephen Sloan for his work on Waco History. Waco History is a joint venture by the Institute for Oral History and the Texas Collection, both housed at Baylor University. This collection of over 6,000 oral histories enriches Waco History's audio and video content and highlights digital collections centered on local history, heritage, and the culture of Waco. A big thank you to Stephen and the entire Waco History team for all that you do to make the history of Waco come alive. This year's Scholarly Communications Award goes to a great team who has demonstrated leadership in the advancement of scholarly communications. This year's Scholarly Communications Award winners are the Scholarly Communications and Metadata team at Texas A&M. Pictured left to right, DJ Lee, Sarah Pippin, David Lowe, and Jeanette Ho pursue a strategy of enhancing the interoperability of A&M scholarly communication systems to make them more useful to researchers over the past 3 years. These systems can be used to publish a range of documents, represent the publications on faculty scholars at TAMU, profiles, and collection and engagement metrics for the publications. The success of their project led to significantly increased faculty engagement, encouraging A&M's faculty to curate many other documents in A&M's repository. Congratulations, scholars at TAMU team. The TDL's Trailblazer Award is given to an individual or a group who has used limited resources in innovating ways to create, maintain, and support digital collections. This year's Trailblazer goes to Chu-Hung Xu at Texas A&M Libraries. Chu-Hung has been an amazing supporter of the projects of the Texas Digital Repository and serves as a cohort trainer instructor of the Carpentries project. When it came time to find an instructor for our first Carpentries workshop, she stepped up and became the first of our Carpentries cohort to serve as a workshop instructor, blazing the trail for the rest of us with her expertise, her willingness to lead, and her team work. In addition to her work with the Carpentries, Shuhong also led a usability study for the Texas data repository that will help improve both the repository and the training for its users. Congratulations and thanks for all you do, Shuhong. Our next award is the Student Excellence Award. The 2022 Student Excellence Award winner goes to a trio of students who have demonstrated overall excellence and significance contributing to digital library practice. For their work on the project, What is a Digital Librarianship, which incorporates interviews exploring the daily tasks and challenges faced by librarians and archivists from the Texas digital library community. These 7 edited interviews with digital librarians professionals were coordinated, conducted, recorded, edited, transcribed, and established in TDL's repository. The Student Excellence Award winners are Misha Coleman, Ali Gunnels, and Chloe Santiago, all recent graduates at UT Austin School of Information. Thank you for your excellent work and congratulations on a job well done. TDL's Excellence Award celebrates a specific project that demonstrates overall excellence in one or more areas of digital curation and digital scholarship practice. This year's TDL Excellence Award goes to Margaret Culbertson, a project director, and Michelle Johnson, project manager, for the work on the William J. H. Texans and Artists Archive. This archive brings together resources from archives, libraries, museums, private individuals, enabling researchers to search and compare records and objects in innovative ways. Moreover, presenting historic records through the lens of artists and skilled craftsmen provides greater visibility of record collections unaffiliated with decorative arts and often overlooked by researchers. Congratulations, Martha and Michelle, for your excellent work. Thank you to all of our award winners, and I will see you again soon. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Next, Courtney Muma will present the TDL Service Awards.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. The TDL Service Award honors TDL members who have made significant contributions to the TDL consortium and/or are members who have used TDL services to their fullest potential. It is the only award that is selected entirely by the TDL leadership and staff. It is my pleasure to present a TDL Service Award to Dr. Christina Chan Park. Christina is the STEM Librarian Coordinator at Baylor University. She has been indispensable to the growth of the Texas Data Repository Dataverse and the strength of its steering committee in her term as Bear Data Liaison. When she served as chair of that group, she kept our institutional liaisons and colleagues on task towards our collective goals. As leader of the steering committee's assessment group, she has led the creation of thorough and attractive usage reports for the collective TDR, as well as for each individual institution. Using those reports and her deep knowledge of TDR steering committee projects, she has also led the creation of updates that TDL has provided to the global Dataverse Community Consortium and to the lead developers at Harvard for their annual meetings. Christina launched a comprehensive user survey that just recently concluded, and its results will help direct the TDR Steering Committee's project roadmap, as well as help refine the objectives of the global Dataverse community of users. She delegated a logo redesign to designers at Baylor that is adaptable for all TDR member institutions, and helped to oversee a student capstone project to draft a Google Analytics user guide for the TDR. Finally, Christina does all of this despite the fact that, like many of our other institutional liaisons for the TDR, managing Bear Data represents less than 10% of her allocated responsibilities. Christina, thank you for your service to TDL and for contributing to the high esteem with which the global Dataverse community views our work. I am incredibly pleased to present a TDL Service Award to Alexa Height. Alexa is the Scholarly Communication Librarian at Texas A&M Corpus Christi and is an active participant and contributor to TDL's work across a number of different areas. She's active in the DSpace user group and has served on the TCDL Planning Committee in the past. But I want to highlight and recognize her in particular for her efforts in launching and serving as the inaugural chair of the TDL OJS user group. Alexa answered our call in 2020 when we determined there was a significant need within the community to better coordinate librarians working in library publishing efforts using TDL's OJS hosting service. And she concluded her term as chair in December of 2021. During her tenure, she oversaw the development of new resources for OJS users, including a new user guide. She also led an effort to write a book chapter on TDL's collaborative service model for library publishing to be included in the forthcoming Academic Libraries and Collaborative Research Services volume coming later this year from Rauman and Littlefield. Alexa's leadership and hard work have been instrumental to the success of the OJS user group as a community of support and have helped raise the profile of the Texas Digital Library within Texas libraries and throughout the library publishing community. Thank you so much, Alexa, and thank you, Christina, for all of the work that you've done, and congratulations on your service awards. Back to you, Christy.
Thanks, Courtney. A big congratulations to all of our award winners. Please take a minute here with me to applaud these folks, either in chat or with emojis or hand waves or however you want. This is just a phenomenal group of people doing exciting and important work, and they deserve to be celebrated. All right, another group of folks worthy of celebration are listed here on this slide. And before we transition into our keynote address, I want to take just a moment to recognize and thank them, our TCDL Planning Committee, for this year's conference. They have worked with such energy and creativity to bring together a meaningful experience for all of us here at TCDL, and I'm so grateful to them, starting with Amanda Zarang from Texas Women's University, who is our conference chair, and Christina Kellum from University of North Texas, who is our vice chair for this year and will serve as conference chair for next year. Thank you also to Adrian Kane, Mingyu Chen, Cynthia Henry, Bruce Herbert, Gabriel Hernandez, Diane Lopez, Diana Morganti, and Adrian Shapiro, who joined this committee from all of our varied member institutions. And a special thank you to Leah DeForest and Tao Votang, who served as leaders and coordinators from the TDL staff side, and who many of y'all already know are just amazing assets to the TDL community. So thank you to all of you for your hard work in making this possible for us. And now I'm going to hand it over to our conference chair, Amanda Zarang, to introduce our keynote speaker. Over to you, Amanda.
Good morning. Thank you, Christy. I am honored and excited to introduce TCDL's keynote speaker, Elaine Westbrooks. Elaine has worked in libraries for more than 2 decades. She began her career as a cataloger and digital researcher at the University of Pittsburgh. Since then, she has advanced to the position of Vice Provost for University Libraries and University Librarian at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. In this position since 2017, she has led a library system that includes 10 libraries, nearly 10 million volumes, 270 librarians, archivists, and staff, and a budget of approximately $45 million. While these numbers are staggering to me, in the upcoming months, Elaine is transitioning into a new role as the Carl A. Kroc University Librarian at Cornell University, where those previously mentioned statistics and numbers will increase exponentially. In her free time, she serves on the boards of the Center for Open Science, Digital Public Library of America, and the HathiTrust Digital Library. She has co-authored 3 books, and I recommend that you check out her Twitter feed to get an idea of the wonderful work being done at UNC. This morning, Elaine will discuss the Reckoning initiative she developed at UNC, the challenges inherent in addressing systemic racism, and the inequities that persist in academic research libraries. On a personal level, as a librarian at a women's institution, which takes immense pride in the diversity of its student body and that strives to develop women as leaders, and as a parent to 3 children, I am grateful for this opportunity to learn from Elaine about what it takes to be an anti-racist, the barriers that make it so elusive and difficult in our profession and academia. I'm inspired by her passion for creating a better world and her passion for the role that libraries play in democracy. The breadth of her experience, her service to the larger library community, and her desire to grapple with systemic issues that plague libraries is an inspiration for those of us institutions who are only at the beginning of this journey. We are so grateful that you could join us today, Elaine. All, please join me in welcoming Elaine Westbrooks to TCDL 2022.
Thank you, Amanda, for that wonderful introduction. I'm just delighted to be here. And again, I want to congratulate all the wonderful award winners. I was just happy to be present to see all the amazing work going on and there in Texas. And I want to express my gratitude to the planning committee for this invitation. And Tal is someone I've been working with, and she has been absolutely amazing in helping me navigate this whole process. I also have to give a shout out to Lorraine Harricombe, who's a colleague and someone I've looked up to for many, many years. And so I'm just honored to be her colleague and have this opportunity to present in front of all of you. And I also have to thank Courtney Muma as well for making this possible and for the contribution. So I realize how much work it takes to do these conferences. And so, and if I left out a few people, my apologies. But again, I'm really grateful for this opportunity. Okay, so I wanted to start by discussing, how did I get to this whole reckoning and transformation process? And I would say that, like many of you, it's been very much about what's been happening in this country in the past 2 years, right? And so I was very much motivated in the midst of the pandemic and the murder of George Floyd to actually want to do something, right? And not to do something like book talks or webinars or LibGuides, but something transformational to address systemic racism. So next slide, please. Okay, so here's an overview of this talk today. And I believe I have 45 minutes, but I'll try to cut it a little bit lower than that just to make sure we have plenty of time to talk. But here are the seven areas I want to cover. And hopefully this gives you a sense of my thinking about what does it mean to be an anti-racist organization and why is this important for libraries? So next slide. So before I get into this, how do we get here? I want to quote Ijeoma Oluo, who basically said that systemic racism is a machine that runs whether we pull the levers or not. And by just letting it be, we are responsible for what it produces. And so we have to recognize that library systems increase inequity in a variety of ways. Each system must be identified and analyzed to identify what is wrong with the system, and an intervention plan must be created to address the problem. And so raising awareness about racism is not a means of correcting injustice. However, I believe that the organization is inspired to act and poised to have courageous conversations as a community when we learn together, right? So how do we get here? Now, of course, I can't cover 400 years of history, which is, I really have to start the 1619, actually even before that. But I want to say that, this is a question that I ask a lot, because it's not so much about looking backwards and to think about specific things in our country's history that are really important, but it's really about thinking about our profession and how I've been in this profession for 20 years and we've been talking about diversity, and we have not moved the needle, and we have not done things that are transformational, right? And trying to hire more people from diverse and underrepresented backgrounds is not enough. And so there's a sense of frustration here that I have experienced for years. And I think, I believe I finally got that courage out of hope in the midst of the pandemic and George Floyd's murder that got us to this point. But I want to share with you some images, and this is a trigger warning. I'm going to share some powerful images. And so if you want to walk away and take a break, but I'm going to share some powerful images that are about an ugly white supremacy events that are taking place in our country. All right, next slide, please. So this is the first thing I want to share. And this, of course, is an image from the Charlottesville event that happened in 2017. And this was one of the things, and this might be one of the first times we've heard this replacement theory. But this was really interesting because when this event happened, I had just moved to Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And Chapel Hill's not that far from Charlottesville, Virginia. And that really launched a lot of turmoil on my particular campus about Confederate monuments. But this is an event that really is just etched in our stone. It was deadly. And I think this was really that first event that took place that said, look, we have to do more. We need to do something more transformational and more impactful, because we're not going to read our way out of white supremacy or systemic racism. Next slide, please. So of course, I've mentioned George Floyd, and I can mention Breonna Taylor as well, but we all were at home when this event happened, when this tragic, preventable loss of life happened. And this is one of those things that, as I was sitting at home, I was just so angry, so upset, enraged, and just distraught in many ways about how is this happening in this country. And so I sat down and penned a letter to my organization, and that was the beginning of our Reckoning Initiative. Next slide. I also want to mention, at this moment, we had millions of people across the globe. Oh, sorry, that's my dog there. Millions of people across the globe who were protesting. And I think this was a pivotal moment in the history of our country. Next slide, please. And we have to mention this, the January 6th resurrection, or insurrection, I should say. This insurrection really, as all these other things I've demonstrated, is really about white supremacy and its threat to democracy, and how democracy is a threat to white supremacy. And so to see this battle flag in display in the Capitol is just a very powerful symbol that is, it's etched in my brain. And this is something that we can never forget about. Next slide. And I don't want us to forget about the violent attacks against Asians and Asian Americans that have taken place since this pandemic has started. And as you know, the news cycle goes up and down, but this is something we shouldn't forget about. And this is still a problem in our country. Next slide, please. So this is the heartbreaking milestone of 1 million confirmed deaths in the United States from COVID-19 since the pandemic began over 2 years ago. And we have an average of 30 people dying a day, right? And so we all know that throughout the pandemic that certain groups, Black folk, Latinx folk, have faced disproportionate hospitalization from COVID-19. And these communities are overrepresented in the deaths and from COVID-19. And so what makes this really important for us to talk about, because it's like, well, what does, we have the pandemic and then we have a racial reckoning, white supremacy. How is this related? Well, it's very much related because we have seen to normalize mass deaths in this country, right? And so when we could, in the wealthiest country in the world where we can have 1 million people die, is just unconscionable. And if I could quote Greg Gonzalez, who's a professor at Yale, was very active in the HIV/AIDS movement. But he basically said, we will tolerate an enormous amount of carnage, suffering, and death in the United States. And that is something that is evident from COVID, but it's also evident in gun violence. And it seems like our level of tolerance around death is just alarming. And it's like it's an inevitability, and that our tolerance of death is partly based on who is at risk, and that some lives matter more than other lives, right? And so if you go to the next slide, this brings me to a very recent event, of course, in Buffalo on May 20th. I'm sorry, May 14th, where 10 Black women or Black people were targeted in a massacre at a Top supermarket in Buffalo. And I think it's important to say their names. We have 10 people ranging from 32 to 86. And this is part of a growing trend in the United States that includes the 2015 murder of 9 worshipers at the historic Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston. It also, I must mention the 2018 shooting at the Tree of Life congregation in the Pittsburgh Synagogue, the 2019 Walmart shooting that targeted Latinx residents in El Paso and Texas, of course. And then in 2021, shooting in Atlanta spa that targeted Asian American women. So this whole, these crimes, these violent hate crimes, racist crimes that are happening are certainly a growing trend, and it's getting worse. And so what does this have to do with libraries? There's a lot to do with libraries because we are, many of us, or actually most of us who are working in these Texas libraries are connected with higher education organizations. And the goal of higher ed is to elevate minds. The goal of higher ed is to bring people out of poverty. And the fact that Black people are getting gunned down just for going to the store to buy a cake for their child for their birthday is something that should be an outrage to all of us. And so this is why we do the work. We need to humanize people so that these types of things do not happen. And of course, we have to address systemic problems. So go to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, I was so distraught with the sitting at home and George Floyd's murder that I penned a message to my staff. And here's a part of what I said. The university libraries at UNC Chapel Hill, like any institution, operates through a set of legacy systems that have been in place for decades. These systems implicitly and explicitly perpetuate inequity because they have been traditionally centered on whiteness and patriarchy as a default. They permeate everything that we do, what we collect, how we describe it, how we deliver services, how we organize our operational functions and design our spaces, and how we structure a budget, where we invest our resources, how we recruit, and who we choose to elevate and highlight, right? So this was a call to action to my organization. And there were basically 5 things I wanted us to focus on. One is acknowledge systemic racism and oppression are present. So that's the first thing I wanted to do. Secondly, I wanted to account for the past, present, and future. So what things have we done as an organization, as a library, whether it's our archives or the library, that have contributed to inequities. And then I wanted us to focus on equity as a lens for all that we do. Then the fourth thing I wanted to focus on was cultivate an environment where we can talk about race, right? Because that's a big problem. We don't like to talk about things that are uncomfortable and difficult. But I wanted to cultivate that environment where it would not be as difficult for people to do that, to have real conversations. And then the fifth part, which is related to cultivating environment, is just how do we learn together? Like, what is it that I need to learn, and I need to learn from other people. And I think as a library community, we would certainly learn together. So next slide. So this is a picture of my Wilson Special Collections Library. And, you know, I guess I use this picture, this photograph, because I would say some of the biggest success stories we've had have been working with our archives. And I started this Reckoning Initiative, and that Reckoning Initiative came with a framework. And the whole point of the framework was to guide the university library's efforts to address inequity and promote racial equity, inclusion, and anti-racism within our organization and through the work that we do. We will dismantle the individual, interpersonal, and organizational levers of systemic inequality. We will implement practices and policies that sustain equity, opportunity, and inclusive excellence. And so that's basically the crux of the framework that I set up with my diversity librarian, or my inclusive excellence librarian, Monica Figueroa, to get us started. So next slide. So what are the barriers? And I think if I could see all of you, I would see some head nodding, some vertical head nods. But I originally just started with these 4 barriers, but then the more time I spent in doing this kind of work, I added another 4 more. Next slide, please. And so these are the ones that I'm sure you've heard a lot of people talk about. And I could cite, if we start at the bottom left, I could cite Fobazi Itar, who has done some work in this area, but this whole idea that that libraries and librarian work and the profession is inherently good and has these sets of values and ideas that are sacred is just not true. The second thing I could mention, if I go on clockwise, false harmony takes place when an organization likes to look harmonious, but not feel harmonious. And so there's this idea that everything's fine, you know, like there's a fire behind us and everything's falling apart, but we want to depict the image that everything is perfectly fine. And if you, in an environment where there's false harmony, you're not supposed to talk about what's wrong. You're not supposed to talk about the problems, the obstacles, the conflicts, the fear, or the concerns. You're just supposed to act like everything is fine. Neutrality is something, of course, that I've seen debated, and I would just say that libraries and archives have never been neutral. Digital libraries aren't neutral. Repositories aren't. There's nothing we do that is neutral. We make choices about what we buy. We make choices about what we acquire, how we organize it, who we approach. We make all these kinds of choices. There's nothing neutral about that, right? And then white supremacy culture is another area with Tema Okun, who's done some really interesting work. Next slide. So these 4 that I recently added is, one of the things that is most difficult is that keeping momentum doing this kind of work is really, really hard. And when you do this work, it takes a lot out of you. And it's just the stress and the trauma of doing this work makes it very difficult to sustain it. So I wanted to mention that, and particularly for people of color, which is you're just trying to deal with life. And then you're going to work and you're trying to do this important work. And it's important, it's important. And you value it, you get a lot out of it, but it doesn't make it less stressful. If I move to the right, exclusive leadership, of course, which is the opposite of inclusive leadership. And I think what's most interesting in the work I've seen is I've seen libraries, because I do a lot of consulting in this space. I see libraries they want to do anti-racist work, but they're doing it in an exclusive way, right? So for example, you want to set up a diversity program, but you only let, 3 or 4 people engage in that process, right? And so you are basically closing the ranks and making a small group of people have the power to make these decisions. Another example is if I just think about inclusive leadership, which is about providing the resources and the fairness that you need to lead. And so if you have a team, and if you're not treating people fairly, then you're not being an inclusive leader, right? And so you can't fix, or you can't be an anti-racist organization if you are imploring or using what I would consider white supremacy systems, right? And so if you want to do everything in command control, it's not going to be inclusive, right? And so you can't use command and control and hierarchy and power and fear as a way to become an anti-racist organization. It just doesn't work that way. And then for resource, I'm sorry, I'll talk about fear. I would say that fear is the biggest obstacle and barrier to any of this work. And it could be fear of the board of trustees. It could be fear of donors. It could be fear, this is by far the biggest problem. And this is legitimate. A lot of people are worried that they're going to get in trouble from their supervisor, that they're getting in trouble from other parts of the administration in the university or the college. And so this is one of those things, if you're going to do this work, you have to figure out a way to attack that fear, because there's always going to be forces that do not want you to do this work, right? And then if I can conclude with resources, and by this I would refer to strategy, planning, expertise, institutional support. These are all kinds of resources. And some people want to talk about time, but I'll get to that. I do not believe that this work, like if everybody got 6 more hours in a day, then we're all going to tackle racism, right? Like, it doesn't work that way, because the biggest thing I hear from my staff is, Elaine, I don't have the time. And it's just like, well, this is not a subtraction or addition problem. Like, let's just give you more time and then we'll tackle it. This is fundamentally a quality issue. Like, you have to change the way you do your work, the way you approach your job. And giving you 2 hours a day is not necessarily going to help you change the quality, right? That's about quantity, right? So if you can go to the next slide, please. So I want to give you some examples of some of the work that's going on at UNC Chapel Hill. Next slide, please. One of the things we did was we released our 21-day racial equity challenge syllabus. So I urge all of you to check it out. We really wanted to come up with a voluntary challenge for the entire organization. And I believe we had somewhere around 65% of our staff participated in this. And we really attacked these core areas of libraries and connected it with resources that people can read. And so what happens is a lot of the things that we read have nothing to do with libraries. And so this syllabus makes sure that if we're talking about surveillance and security, we found an article, a podcast, or something about that as it pertains particularly to libraries. And so this is something I believe we're going to go back to, and we have to update this. So keep your eyes peeled for a new version of this racial equity challenge syllabus. Next slide, please. One of the things we also want to focus on is programmatic. Like, what are the programs we do? What are the services we provide? And this is one of the things that came up. We had a teacher, I think a 10th grade teacher, who called us and said, hey, is there any listing of all the Jim Crow laws in North Carolina? And we were like, you know what? I don't think there is. And so we started exploring it. And so the librarian from our special collections contacted our digital research team, and they started, doing some text mining and machine learning. And we've got some Mellon funding, and we've expanded it from North Carolina to South Carolina, as well as Virginia. And this is just an example of projects where we can focus on areas that we know are not really getting the attention they deserve. Next slide. So I wanted to show a little bit about our IDEA action grants. And so one thing I've learned is that a lot of the work that is done in equity, diversity, accessibility is never rewarded. And so I wanted to create a grant program. And so I allocated $250,000 to anybody in the library who wanted to do anything with inclusion, diversity, equity, or accessibility. And I mean, it's been what I consider a very successful program, in that the whole goal was for people to get money to do things. And so the money was often used to hire like a service to transcribe videos. We used the money to hire graduate students. One of the projects we took on is we have a Black and Blue tour, which is a history of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where we focus on African-American history. And so we had done that tour, and a long time ago, and it needed to be updated. And so we were able to get the resources for the university archivist to hire students to create this new updated resource. And I can go on, but the key part is it puts the values of inclusion and diversity and accessibility to work in the day-to-day activities of the university libraries. There's no reward or award system for this work, and that's a major problem. And if you're not looking at your promotion process, your hiring process, and how people are rewarded, then you're not going to get very far either. And so we are in the process of updating our promotion and appointment. And so as people go from assistant librarian to associate librarian, we want to look at their work and diversity and how they get credit for it. And that has to count towards promotion. Next slide. So this is an article that we wrote to talk about our conscious editing project. And this is largely about our special collections. But we decided that we had to rework our online descriptions for collections of papers, as well as our catalog records for published materials. And so this work's goal was to replace racist and derogatory language and to add information that presents more balanced accounts for example, by indicating if someone was an enslaver, or by highlighting collection material about African Americans. Names of enslaved individuals were added when they are known. In some cases, gender inequities were also addressed. So for those of you who have these archives, you have these legacy collections, like we have our collections, of course, we focus on the history of the South. And it was very apparent that we have large plantations, and the fact that the University of North Carolina 1789 is the first public university, was built by enslaved people. Students brought their slaves to campus, and they were hired by administrators of the university to do things like build walls for dining, for cleaning, and things like that. So we have this deep history, and our archives and our description, our metadata reflected a history of centering the enslavers. And so a plantation could have hundreds of enslaved people, yet their names would not be there. They would be erased. And so the finding aid would be all about the enslaver. And we realized that this isn't right. And so we have begun that process, and we call it conscious editing. And I put in a citation for that document that's in our Carolina Digital Repository for those of you to take a look at it. Next slide. So building a strategy is all about changing the culture of your institution, right? This is fundamentally what you're in the business of doing. And that's why I know that having a book club doesn't change your culture, right? Having a LibGuide doesn't change culture. It is really about changing what is possible and making diversity, inclusion, and equity work about solving, about strategy and about transformation, and not about being just a problem. Like, this is a problem that has to be fixed. When I think diversity, equity, and inclusion is a solution. And so we often view it as problematic, but we have to change that way of thinking and that mindset. Next slide. And so what we did was we characterized the reckoning work at University of North Carolina in these 5 categories, right? And so the education and training, the programmatic work, check. That was the easy stuff, right? That was, let's talk about how to be anti-racist. Let's talk about and educate ourselves about how we can be better human beings and things like that. So that's the easy stuff. The programmatic work was the easy stuff, like, you know, let's look at these Jim Crow laws. Let's make sure that we are thinking about our users who have print disabilities and how we can make those video resources more accessible and transcribed. So those are very simple. The really, really hard things are the 3, 4, and 5 that are listed here. And I want to just give some more detail about how we approached the first 2 and why it was, well, I already talked about why it was so easy, but the main point of the first 2 items here was about promoting a growth and engagement, self-awareness, and knowledge throughout our organization, right? And so when we think about the programmatic work, the goal was to support and create programs that are designated to center underrepresented groups, right? And so now, as again, we check those 2. When we started to think about anti-racist and equity practices as a critical component of everyone's job, racial equity, inclusion, anti-racist work is not about stopping one thing in order to do another. We need to change the focus of our work. So this is really challenging. And I'll go through some of the things we've tried to pivot, right? And so when we categorize these 5 areas of work, it made a lot of sense. But the more we dug in, these categories really overlap quite a bit. And it just didn't really work for us, but it was a good starting point as we tried to actually be more intentional about addressing systemic racism. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so if I, just to talk about the strategy, one of the things that I find when I consult is that a lot of institutions just don't have a strategy in place for how they're going to address systemic racism, yet let alone anti-racism or to increase the diversity or anything like that. So so that's what I often sit down with folks to focus on is, are you really ready to go down this path, right? Like, have you saved your money? You know, are you prepared to do things that make people really uncomfortable? I can tell you, when I launched the Reckoning Initiative, I had some pushback, and I expected that pushback, and I had to prepare for that pushback. And some of it was from administration, some of it was from donors, and some of it was from staff, but I did not let that deter me, right? And so I really wanted to focus on making sure that the leadership team knew exactly what we were getting into and that we were going to have the right resources. The second part is it has to be transformational. It cannot be checkbox diversity that is really about, like I said, the LibGuides and just saying, here are a couple of things that we could read, something that's very simple, low-hanging fruit. We really wanted to focus on the most difficult things that we needed to do. For example, how is it that we tend to hire the same kind of people, right? The people who look like us. And so it really forced us to dig down and change our entire recruitment and hiring process, right? And guess what? When we were able to acknowledge the fact that when we hire people, everybody doesn't have to have 15 years of experience and hit the ground running when they come to UNC Chapel Hill, that changed our pools significantly. And we were able to recruit more diverse people that way. The third thing I want to mention is values driven. And this is really important because a lot of people tell me, they said, Elaine, you know, what about the haters? What about the people who don't want to do this? And I say, I don't worry about those. You know, your job is to make sure that the people you have on your staff who are engaged and who want to do this work, that you provide them with inspiration, right? That's your number one goal. The second goal is the people on the fence. You got some people who are like, I don't know if I want to do this work, or I'm afraid. You have to work with those people to say, this is worth it. This is tremendously, enriching. I mean, when you make progress in this work, it is just very powerful. And so I really focus on those. And the third group of people who do not want to engage, they do not believe in systemic racism, things like that, I don't worry about. But as the leader of my organization, I could say that this is a value for UNC Chapel Hill Libraries, and as a value for the organization of wanting to be anti-racist, this is what we're going to do. Now, you might not believe in that value, or you might be a group of people in the organization, but it doesn't matter. It's the organizational value. And if we value diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, then this is what we're going to do. The other thing I want to mention about the strategy is it has to be simple, right? You cannot come up with something that is 25 pages long. Like, you have to be able to communicate this over and over and over in simple ways. Everybody is not reading Ruth Gilmore and can talk about abolition, right? Everybody is not reading Ibram Kendi. Everybody is not reading a lot of these books and a lot of these spaces where you can go and get a lot of information. So you have to be able to define systemic racism really easily. You have to be able to tell a story about why libraries should be in this business of anti-racism, why it is important that institutions whose primary goal is to make information accessible, why that has to be part of an equity plan for an organization. So this is really hard to make something as complicated as oppression and systemic racism. It's really hard to make that simple. Next slide. Okay. So I wanted to continue talking about what you need in your strategy. And I think that these clear objectives or goals are something that is really important to communicate what you want to achieve. And so for us, you know, we had clear goals as to how each year, what percentage of our staff would be from underrepresented groups, right? And so that was an HR goal to say, this is where we're moving towards. And this is why we're doing it. And so that was something that was easy and measurable. Of course, a lot of this work is not measurable, and I'll talk a little bit about that. The second part is the incentives and rewards for people who take on this work. The third part is the infrastructure. What kind of systems are you going to provide people to be able to do what they need to do? So for example, if one of the things we've been working on is some kind of dashboard so that each unit in the library could be able to track what they're doing and be able to talk about what they're doing and be able to provide those powerful stories about the great work that's going on. The fourth thing is policy, right? And so I already mentioned that we've had to revamp our hiring process. And so now that has to be codified in policy. And that by that is we had to make it clear that that the search committee's job was to do A, B, C, and D, that the search committee must be composed of a diverse group of people. We also, what's another good example for that process? We also tried to do away with this whole idea of making people pay for things up front. And so you have to pay for your ticket, pay for your hotel, whatever, and trying to figure out, like, how do we change that policy so that when people come to interview, they're not, you know, using their last penny to come, and just, it creates barriers for people who have low wealth. So that policy is really important because that policy is going to transcend whoever's in the organization. And once we change that policy, that's it. And so now we don't want to make it possible for anybody to be expected to pay upfront for an interview, for example. And then the final thing is the communication plan is really important to be able to have someone who's going to clearly articulate what it is you're doing, what are your wins, where's the areas of progress, how you're able to impact students, how you're impacting our spaces, how you're impacting faculty, how you're making people's lives better. Next slide, please. Okay, so I've already talked about this to a certain degree, but the biggest challenge is, of course, next slide, I'm sorry. I wanted to show this slide one more time because what I would have done differently is focused on the systems analysis first, right? So if you can go to the next slide, please. And so stuff we know how to do, right? So these are really difficult things we have to do. And so the stuff we know how to do is systems analysis. So for example, systems analysis would be looking at hiring, for example. And so all I had to do was look at the demographics. When I got to UNC Chapel Hill, I believe the librarians were, I think it was something like 92% white. And that's a fact, that's a data point. And so what we did was we looked at those facts, right? And so what we did was start with that number and then set goals for how we were going to change that number. But in that process, we talked about how we're going to recruit very differently. And then we set up a process where we would actually, oh shoot, how do we say this? When we would recruit, we would focus on underrepresented communities. And so, you know, posting on the ALA websites was okay, but what we really wanted to do was focus on the HBCUs and places like that. So what you do is you take that system, and the system, it could be surveillance and security, it could be acquisitions, it could be metadata, it could be budget, it could be communications, it could be fundraising. Pick the system you want and then collect the data. And what I regret not doing is starting here. This is the most important thing. This is the most transformational thing you could ever do. So that's stuff we learned how to do, but it's really, really difficult. Then there's some of my folks could integrate anti-racism practices into their library work, but a lot of people couldn't. And so then we hired a consultant and we had an inclusive excellence librarian, and they had to actually sit down with people and try to help them talk through this. And then the final area that I don't know anybody's doing this well. And if any of you know someone, let me know, but tracking and accessing DEI work and anti-racism work is really, really difficult. And I haven't found any systems out there or any groups out there that's doing this particularly well. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we know how to identify the systems, right? And I think what we did was I had all my leadership team, we all got in a room and we all started to list the systems that each team was responsible for. So I had the AUL for IT. And I was like, Tim, list all the systems in your area. So the Carolina Digital Repository is a system. The all the other digital libraries that we have are systems that we have to look at. And so whether it's fundraising, we had to look at, well, what do our boards look like? What do our donors look like? Of course, in the fundraising, that's a really challenging area where, you know, donors are going to be 99% white. So how do we try to recruit members of our board who are not white, right? How do we recruit members who are younger? How do we recruit members from other parts of the country? So gathering that data and then identifying, and I put this in red, how do you identify the harmful features of the system? You have to train yourself to do it. I can see those harms because I remember what it was like to apply for a job and I didn't have enough money to buy a flight, right? And so that's an easy example, but I really just look back on my career, particularly the early part, And I can just really see all those harmful features of the systems that I was subjected to when I was starting off as a librarian. Number 4 is you have to identify the people empowered to change the system. And the challenge with systemic work is it really can't be a bottom-up approach, right? And so your liaison librarian is not going to change your hiring process, right? Your librarian who does communications isn't going to change that. It really has to happen from a position of power, and you have to have your leadership team on board. Number 5 is we work with a consultant to design those interventions. And so if we are going to increase the diversity of our staff, what are the 6 things that we have to do within the hiring process, within the recruiting process? How do we set up our search committees? That's something we focused on. And then that future state is, well, what is it that we want? That it's not that we want to tokenize people and just bring in Black and brown people, but we want a more innovative organization. We want a more equitable organization. And so that future state is always an organization where people can be their best selves, people can be free, people can do the work that they love, and people can feel like they're making a difference. That's the future state. And you do that with a more diverse team. And then finally is the documenting and assessing progress. Like I said, we're not doing that really well at all, but we're trying. Next slide. Okay, so I want to use an example. One of the toughest areas that we're trying to address is security, public safety, and surveillance. And this really came to bear during the pandemic, because if you remember, we were at that point where we were trying to figure out how we're going to make sure people wear masks, and who gets to wear a mask and who doesn't, and who tells them to wear a mask. Well, a lot of people seem to think that we were going to just police it away. Right. And I had some problems with that, because I know from my personal experience that when you call the police, people can die. Right. And so we had to have some really deep conversations about what it is we're trying to do and who gets to call surveillance and policing, who suffers from it, how can it be useful. We can't avoid it at my university. You cannot avoid it. There has to be some kind of security presence. However, the way it is deployed and how we look at it, and if we can create a world where we don't need security guards in our libraries, that's that future state. And so this is something that we haven't fully figured out, but this was a really interesting conversation. And we need to have more conversations, particularly with our staff who are really on those front lines doing access services, circulation, things like that, who deal with the public every day, to rethink what it is that we need to have people be safe. And by safe, I mean people in the library, the staff, as well as our public. But these are kind of the steps that we went through, basically with any system. We did it with our collections. We did it with archives. We did it with our communications, right? And so this is, and again, this is something we came up with. This is not trademarked or anything. We made this up because I couldn't find anything out there that says this is how you analyze systems in libraries. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we're struggling with that whole integrating the anti-racism practices part. And I just want to be honest, is that there's just certain areas where we have more leadership and some areas where we don't. And when you look at things like budget and finance and try to figure out, well, how do you approach that with a more equitable lens, people really struggle. Now, I certainly have ideas about it, but for our accountants and people like that, it takes a lot of work to get people to rethink and to rewire themselves and changing the way they approach their work and thinking about equity in very different kinds of way. We also have these diversity goals. And if you have those, just know that it's going to take 5 years to get them anywhere. Like if you want them to actually be useful, give yourself 5 years before, and you'll probably end up changing your system. But at the end of the day, having goals that are not just checkbox goals that actually mean something takes a lot of time. It's a muscle that you just have to exercise. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned, we're just really struggling with measuring equity and social justice work. If any of you have some suggestions on this, I'm all ears. But measuring if we're making a difference. I mean, I also wonder if certain things that we do, we're making things more difficult or worse. So the assumption that there's always progress is not the right assumption. I think there are cases where you step back 2 or 3 steps in this work. I think one thing we're doing a little bit better is the data for stories of impact and transformation. One of the links at the end, we did analysis of our institutional repository, and we wanted to look at the demographics of the people who submit to our repository and what that tells us about our repository and who uses it and who do we need to target, or is it okay? Is it not okay? But that was something where it was easy to quantify. Well, actually, it wasn't that easy because you often don't know the identities of people who deposit in your repository, right? So we had all these other tools. But the whole point is, until we did this reckoning, I don't know if we would have thought, hey, what's the racial composition of everybody who deposits in our digital repository? We didn't ask those kinds of questions. We also did a lot of interesting IT work, and there are words that we had to eradicate. So you have these blacklists, and you have all these terms that we no longer use anymore in development and coding. And I think that does demonstrate intentionality and progress. And you can sort of measure it, but again, we're struggling in this space. Next slide. So the biggest mistakes. The 5 categories that we set up, programs, learning, just really didn't work very well. It's not the way people think about diversity work. Like, you don't get up in the morning and say, hey, I want to do a program and I want to focus on underrepresented groups. And so those categories were established. We're in a process of revamping. As I already mentioned, I would have started with the systems analysis work first. This is the hardest work, but I think it's the most impactful work. Number 3, we need to communicate more to the organization that we are doing things. In some ways it's progress, but a lot of the work that our IT department was doing was unknown to archives, and a lot of work happening in tech services was unknown. A lot of our staff didn't understand that our development team had done a thorough analysis of all our donors. And so we have to get a better way of at least communicating the work that is happening. Maybe not goals, but just this is what we're doing. And then, as I mentioned, when you are going through a lot of different things, it's hard to keep up the momentum, right? And so you might not hear about something and it sounds like it's inertia, but the reality is we're dealing with a budget cut, or we're dealing with the trauma of yet another mass shooting in Buffalo, New York. Like, keeping the momentum is really difficult. And for me, it's my legacy. I think it's important. I'm always going to talk about it, but I also realize that there are limitations in people and their capacity to take on this work. And then I think the final point I want to make is I would have also spent more time building the confidence of the leaders. We all went to Racial Equity Institute training. We did a lot of work, and we talked about how it is we could do our jobs differently. But the confidence level just wasn't always there. And I think that's something I want to work on more. Next slide. So curating the future we want, having a sustainable plan is difficult. Next slide. But I think I'm really pleased that my organization, I think, has made tremendous strides. And I believe that most of my staff now can articulate what role the library has played in perpetuating inequities in their specific systems. I do think that we still want to increase equity, and we have a long way to go, but there's such an awareness of what we're doing throughout the organization. And the fact is, as was mentioned earlier, I'm leaving Carolina next week. But this reckoning process is going to stay. Like, I don't believe a new leader is going to come in and just pull it out. It is who we are. It is so ingrained in our organization that it is entrenched and it will continue, because it can't be just a leader that can ram this down the throats. I am grateful that my staff trusted me enough to lead them down this path. And now that I'm moving on, they are committed to the path. And I think that is just powerful. And I'm just extremely grateful. If I go to number 3, instilling anti-racist policies and practices is something, the policies is just a really important part. And so, for example, when we put a pause on security and wanting to look at that, that was a sign to our staff is what we're doing just isn't quite working. We need to pause and we need to investigate this, and we need to have more conversations about policing in our library. And then the 4th part, thinking about communities that have been dehumanized, silenced, and marginalized is something that we continue to center. And it's really important for the work that we do, whether it's LGBTQ, racialized groups, people with disabilities. This is something that's really important to us. We look at our spaces a lot. Can people in a wheelchair navigate our spaces? I mean, we think really broadly about diversity, equity, inclusion, and we also include accessibility because we think that's just critical. And then just as far as making our library just more inclusive for each other, that's really important. Next slide. So as I conclude, I just want to be clear that libraries are made up of people, and people can create change. Sustainable transformation remains elusive when it comes to many of the institutional inequities we face. Just to name a few, racism, sexism, homophobia, ageism still exist, are embedded into the foundations of our society. We can't begin to transform libraries within higher education without seeing the truth about them. We can't begin to transform institutionalized racism until we see it as institutional in the first place, as foundational to our laws, our cultural patterns, and our organizational structures. That's a hard truth to face, and the implications are far-reaching. So we often want to jump to solutions so that we can fix the problem. And we are often only able to fix a piece of the problem because we have failed to see it fully. And so my whole point is each of us can make a difference. We can transform our libraries and we can make change. It takes time, and it's very convenient to try to move to the easiest thing to fix. But the reality is we have systems in our libraries that have to change. We have to commit to changing them. And I believe we can. It's difficult. It takes time. Some of us will pay a price. Some of us will be punished. But at the end of the day, we all want to be free. And that's what it's always going to be about, is freedom and liberation. Next slide, please. So be courageous, as I said, but also save your money because this work is tough work. Please learn from each other. And when you learn something, share it with your colleagues. Be a resource. This is the most rewarding work I've ever done. I mean, I felt like I fought with Elsevier. I've had these, budget discussions at my institution, but there's nothing more rewarding than this work and seeing how it has really energized my staff. The 4th point is there is a repair process that is critical. Once you know that you have done some harm, you have to repair it. You have to address it, right? And that is really important work that I believe often requires some kind of training. And as I mentioned before, I don't think that freedom and liberation is optional. That's what we all want. That's what we've always wanted. And I don't want us to get lost in all of this conversation. So I'm going to end there, and I'm going to take your questions. I'm not sure where I am on time. I think I may have went over a little bit. But thank you.
Thank you so much, Elaine. And that was eye-opening, and I really appreciate your time. And now we will open things up for Q&A. Everyone is welcome to turn on their cameras if you feel comfortable doing so, and feel free to share any questions you have in chat. If you'd prefer to ask anonymously, you can add your question to our community notes document in the question sections. Okay, and Elaine, while we're getting a little more comfortable, I will go ahead and ask one of the questions from our community notes. How can library leaders create more opportunities for librarians and archivists to contribute to anti-racist work at their own organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say the first part is just being informed. And I think I've had to read a lot. I read a lot every day about areas. Now, cataloging is my area, but I read a lot about IT and what is happening in the IT space, particularly HR space. I learned you could run your job description through a tool and it tells you which language is often attracts women or repels women. Like we set up these job ads, particularly for IT, that really are geared towards men. And we wonder why we don't have more women in IT. So you have to educate yourself is the number one step. And I would say the second step is if you want to create those opportunities, you have to create a space for people to step up and to say, I'm interested in this. I know there's a problem. We have amazing staff. I know this is a problem and I want to fix it. And you have to create an environment where people can say that and also give them the opportunity to say, or to at least have that conversation of what is the problem we're trying to fix? How is that going to be better for our community? And how can I help you get there?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
This one may be difficult, but I think it's one we're all interested in, and that is, how do you stay motivated?
Well, I guess I'll tell you, sometimes it's tough, especially after May 14th. I didn't feel particularly hopeful on May 14th. However, I do believe that I have no choice but to keep going on. I have no choice to continue educating myself and to push, because people are dying. People are constantly being dehumanized. And I just can't sit there and watch that. And so, when I get a little down, I often just often talk to, I guess, younger people who seem to have a lot of energy and who are really, I don't know if the word is tolerant, but they just are not tolerant of this world where we can accept any inequity and just say, oh, it's just the way it is. Because, my generation has really gone through a lot, and the previous generation has gone through a lot. But this fight is generational. Every generation has to take it up. And so one of the things I do is I mentor a lot of people who are beginning in the field so that they can gain power, so that they can gain confidence, and so that they can be a force for good in their organizations. And so I get a lot of energy off of my mentees. And so that's another way that really gets me excited and helps me to keep going.
I like that. You mentioned not being deterred by resistance from administrators, donors, and staff. Can you share more about what that resistance looks like and how you have successfully navigated it?
Well, I can use an example. When I had released the Reckoning Initiative, I had two donors who were, I wouldn't say upset. I think they were just confused, right? And so when you start using words like white supremacy and patriarchy, it it can really unsettle people who are not used to having those words in their vocabulary. And so I, first, my development director sat down and spoke with them about these terms and what it is I'm trying to do. Because their question was, what does this have to do with libraries? Why are you bringing up these unpleasant things? And when we broke it down and talked about access to information, we talked about decisions we made 50 years ago, the way we dehumanized people in our archive, we erased people. You know, they actually started to get it, but they did not know what institutional racism was. And so it started with that definition of this is what I mean, because a lot of people say, oh my goodness, white supremacy. I'm not a racist, you know, and the whole point is we're not talking about you. We're talking about the system. You don't have to sit down and be racist to participate in institutional racism, right? You just have to be there. It's just like breathing air. I mean, we are surrounded by racism. We're surrounded by homophobia, patriarchy. These are things that we swim in on a daily basis. And the reason why it's institutional is that we don't even notice it, right? And so that conversation was really the beginning, and they got it. And I really didn't get any pushback from those donors after that. Now, I do know the other thing I'll say is I lost a few donors, but I gained some donors too. Right, I gained some people that said, you know what, Elaine, I'm going to give you resources for this reckoning initiative because I like it. I mean, I had some donors who gave me the money and they put it in Nicole Hannah Jones's name, right? So you don't always lose. Like, you can open yourselves up, and that's even our conscious editing project. Is people just say, oh, you're changing history. No, you're not changing. I mean, we are now opening up our archives to a whole community of people, because we went through the process of changing some of the language, right? And we keep the original language, but we don't feel like people should come in our archives and be subjected to these dehumanizing names. It's just not right, right? So you have to think of both sides of it. And I try not to give too much power to those who just don't want things to change, because that's one thing is I manage change and I push for change. No leader comes into a library and says, we're going to keep everything the same. Like, it just never happens. When I go to Cornell, things are going to change. That's just the nature of the process.
Well, I look forward to hearing about those changes you make at Cornell too. I'm going to pause a bit in case someone wants to unmute and speak. And if not, I'll go next to our next question in the community notes. Elaine, what drew you to libraries?
I just always loved them. I grew up around the corner from a Carnegie library. It was the second library that Andrew Carnegie built in Pittsburgh. And it had a pool and a bowling alley, and it was really a palace for the people. I mean, it really was. And so I did that. And then when I enrolled at the University of Pittsburgh on the first day of class, I got a job at the library, and I have never left. I mean, I worked in interlibrary loan, gifts and exchange, reserves, every unit in the library I worked in. And so it just kind of drew me in. And I was fortunate enough to really like it and get good at certain parts of it, and gotten to the point where I am now. But I'm still learning. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to learn about being a leader. A lot of stuff you don't learn in library school either. Like I learned a lot about roofing and stuff like that. You don't learn that in library school. I wasn't taught how to raise money in library school. I wasn't taught how to start a diversity equity plan and framework in library school. So a lot of stuff you have to learn on your own, and I've had to get training.
Is there a limit to how effective IDEA reckoning can be while libraries, and especially those in academia, are increasingly taking on characteristics of corporate bodies that value property and capital over people? I can reread that. That was a mouthful.
No, I got it. That's a I love that question. That's a great question. I do agree there are limits. Even at my institution, I mean, we're part of a university, right? And they don't call it the ivory tower for nothing. So I create the change for my library. I cannot change the provost. I cannot change the chancellor. But I can create the environment for my own organization. And that has been my big focus. And it also, I can't change capitalism. I can't change surveillance capitalism. I mean, this whole disinformation is a problem, but libraries alone cannot fix it, right? It's going to be a lot of work so that the 18-year-old who massacred those people in Buffalo, how do you educate people so that they don't believe replacement theory? I mean, we have a lot of obstacles. And so I do think that you can make change within a department or a unit, even if it isn't throughout the whole library. Like, I just can't stop, because I could just say, look, this is a capitalistic society. You know, labor is labor. You know, there's always going to be someone on top. There's always someone on the bottom. I mean, I do have a capitalistic critique of it, but I can't let that stop me from trying to make the changes that are really important. I mean, one thing I had mentioned in this talk was corporate responsibility. And I do think libraries need to put more pressure on our vendors, publishers, the companies we work with. There are companies that we work with that, you know, are working with prisons, you know, that work with, you know, collecting data about immigrants. And I mean, there's all kinds of stuff out there. And so at some point, we have to decide as a community, are we going to support these kinds of companies? Are they consistent with our values? That's and you know, I can just talk about open access as one case, but then we start talking about how data are being used, and are these companies also supporting government surveillance, their anti-privacy, you know, those types of things. We really have to have a serious conversation. I mean, I'm willing to walk away from many publishers who don't meet our values, but now we're talking about bigger things than that.
Thank you, Elaine. This next question, I think, piggybacks really nicely to what you said about you as a leader. How can you change the organization when the lead of your library is in that group that doesn't want to do the work?
Yeah, that's tough. And I guess it depends, because some cases are worse than others. I think some leaders want to do better, they just don't know how. Some leaders lack the conviction, like they don't really want to do it. And then you got the third category, was they don't want to do it and they are cowards. Like, this just point blank. They don't want to take the chance. They don't want to risk the loss of power and reputation. So I could sympathize with that situation. And I think there are two options. You could, one, try to create the change in your small domain. And then the other option is you're going to have to go elsewhere. The problem is there are lots of problems everywhere we go. And lots of times people say they support it, but they don't really support it. And when you start pushing, then you really see what people believe. It's just hard. I don't have a really good answer for that, because I know you just can't pick up and switch jobs because you have a leader who really doesn't want to do anything in this space. And you see the hypocrites, you see the people who talk about it and act like it, but they really don't want it to happen. So I would just say you get your, you try to make the difference wherever you are, and then help people at other places who are making a difference.
Speaking of people at other places, Lorraine, I apologize, I did not see your hand up. Please join.
Thank you. I wanted to just applaud you, Elaine, for a wonderful, thought-provoking presentation. You inspire me. You said that earlier about me, but you inspire me in the work that you do and lead in our profession. And I so respect and value that. Thank you. We are in that same space here, of course, at UT. And I was interested in listening to all this work and energy that you and your entire staff put into this work, how that impacted the university's culture. I always think of libraries as catalytic leaders on our campuses. I use that very often here when I speak about the work that we do and lead. Often during the pandemic, libraries stepped up as leaders to support academic continuity, as an example. But this work strikes me as exactly a good role, a significant role actually, for libraries. And wondered if you can share with us some of the impacts at the university through this work. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. That's a great question. I mean, I would say that on my campus, there's a huge committee where every diversity officer from every unit participates. And so that's been our largest venue by which we're able to share what we're doing. However, I would say that the work that we're doing, I don't know how much our administration really knows about it and understands it. And so when I meet with my supervisor, who's a provost, on a regular basis, you know, I have maybe 45 minutes, right? And so I got to talk about budget and things like that. But when I talk about a lot of these things, to be quite honest, I don't feel like he fully understands. And so when I talk about conscious editing, I don't really think he understands that we got 26 million manuscripts. I don't think he understands that these manuscripts contain the most dehumanizing language, the most derogatory, offensive language you've ever seen, the erasure of women. You know how they would list the man, and they would never mention the spouse, the language that we use to describe indigenous people. I mean, it could just go on and on. And so I really don't think they truly understand the depth and breadth of our work. And so on one hand, you could say, well, that's great. I mean, you could fly under the radar. But on the other hand, I feel like we were and are an exemplar, but I don't know if the other campus units are truly looking at what we're doing. And so I've heard from some of the deans, and they say, oh, Elaine, I heard about this. Can you tell me more about this and that? I've had a few deans reach out to me, but as far as the provost and the chancellor, I don't really believe that they fully understand, because people say, well, it's a library. Like, what, you know, why would, like, what reckoning work do you really have to do? And so that I think is unfortunate. Like, I think our university could certainly benefit, but I also, part of it is that administrators are not informed as they should be. And they also, they're not as committed as I am, to be quite honest. And they, you know, they're good people, but they're not really committed. And that's the message I get pretty daily. I hope that answers your question, Lorraine.
Thank you. This next question is from Justin White at UT Rio Grande Valley. I found library administration to be intractable since the turnover is slower, so hiring based on anti-racist principles isn't a solution. When I was applying for admin positions, they seemed uncomfortable with my answers to their questions about DEI, about accountability for managers as the only way to make actual change. How have you navigated accountability for anti-racist work in the library management? Maybe you tie it into evaluations, or are you able to do that at your institution?
Great question. I do tie in accountability. In order to be a department head at my library, you have to be trained in diversity work, and you will be evaluated on it on an annual basis. It's important. And if you don't want to do it, then you're not going to be a manager. So we really do build in that accountability. Now, everyone's not comfortable with it, but we have spent a lot of time working with our department heads. And actually, we need to do a lot more work on helping them coach their staff through this kind of work, why it's important, and how they're going to be assessed. So I agree that accountability is really, really important. And I hold my AULs, my associate university librarians, and my directors, for each of them, they have to have a goal. And a goal can't just be, I'm going to go to a class. Like it's like, I want to see your intervention on your systems work about increasing, I don't know, the accessibility of your library, like, branch library, something like that. Like, I really have pushed them to think deeply about this work. And they know that if they're not going to promote, encourage, provide the climate and environment for this work to happen, that they will, there'll be consequences for that. But again, that's coming from the top. Like, I don't know, you can't do it the other way around. You can't make your boss make people accountable. So unfortunately, I know many of you are in that situation where there just isn't a lot of that work happening at a higher level. And it's very frustrating. And I hear you and I see you. But some places you'll be surprised. It was funny when I interviewed at Cornell, I was like, I don't know if you want this, because this is what I'm about. Like, I didn't hide this, and they still hired me. So, places tell you who they are. If they didn't want to do diversity work, they wouldn't have hired me, because they know that's what I'm going to bring. And if you go to a place and you interview and you're talking diversity and they don't want to hire you, it's probably not the place.
I feel like they want you to bring that accountability there too. Christy, I don't know if we have time for more questions or if we should.
Let's make time for one more, and then I think we can begin wrapping things up.
Okay, great. Thank you. I was interested in your project to get details about who deposits in your institutional repository. To recreate in our context, I'm not sure where we would pull the race information. Can you share what your data source was for that information at UNC?
Yeah, I think if someone could pull it off the PowerPoint and put it the link, I believe we used some kind of service for that, but I can't remember. It's in the report, I promise, and it's in our Carolina Digital Repository. But you could find the whole method for that report online. But you're right, like the stuff is not readily available. We had to use a third party to figure it out. And we had to do a lot of work, back end work.
Thank you, Elaine.
Well, we will make sure we find that and get it into the community notes document so that it's shared with everybody. And Leah, if you could share out that link to the community notes document one more time before we wrap up so folks can grab that, that would be great. I just want to say again, thank you, just heartfelt thank you to Elaine for this wonderful time that you've given us today. This has been challenging and inspiring. It has been really generative just for me personally, thinking about how TDL can support this kind of work across the multiple institutions we work with. And I really just want to say thank you for the work. I don't know if you've had a chance to see some of the chatter going on in chat, but it's been a really rich conversation going on, folks talking about the challenges that they're dealing with in their organizations around this and some of the ideas they have. So this has been really stimulating for all of us, I think. So thank you. I'm wondering if we could all unmute just for a moment and give Elaine a round of applause.
Yeah.
Woo! Yes, I love hearing that noise. That's great. I miss that about in-person conferences sometimes, so thank you. And thank you, Amanda, for moderating today. Thank you to all of our presenters, to Lorraine, and a big congratulations to all of our award winners as well. This has been just a really fun, positive, and stimulating time together, and a great way to kick off TCDL 2022. So I just want to mention we're heading into the lunch hour, so please enjoy a break, enjoy your lunches, and then I hope everybody will join us back at 1 p.m. Central for a reflection session, and we'll have some of our committee members facilitating discussion about all of these ideas that Elaine has shared with us today. So this is your chance to re-engage with this conversation at 1 o'clock. So be sure and join us for that, and then we'll continue with sessions this afternoon. So with that, we're going to wrap up this opening session. Thank you again to everyone for being here, and to Elaine especially. And we'll see you in just a couple hours. Everybody take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye, everyone.